Lurking, no doubt, Ed, lurking, right? So I'm interested in seriously thinking about Hanukkah. Like, this is not just like a, something the rabbi makes up on a, and decides it's a cool thing to bring together. I'm really saying in a way that the way the rabbis understand the exiles of the past is a very helpful kind of key to contemporary anti-Semitisms. So just to start out, the rabbis talk about four kingdoms, whatever they mean by that. I don't even, kingdom's not a great word for it. It's like they're dominant. And the first one is Persia, then Babylonia, and then the Greek, and then the Roman. So it's really the latter two I want to focus on. Again, the way Chazal understand these two holidays. I'm sorry, the way Chazal understand, where were we a second ago? Yeah.
Four kingdoms.
Right. So the way they understand the four kingdoms. Thank you.
One of them isn't Egypt. I find that
No,
strange.
so Egypt is not, which is interesting. The idea is, the way the rabbis understand it is, it's the Jewish people are to lay down the Jewish people when they leave Egypt. So they're not.
It's from Daniel, huh? The book
Right,
of Daniel.
exactly. It's from Daniel, and it's amplified like 1,000 times by the Maharal. Exactly. Right. So, so here, let's just look at pictures, because pictures are always fun. Okay, share. This is from a presentation I did for the organization I work with called ISGAP over the summer. Dr. Feldman and a colleague of mine in the Netherlands put together this project. And this I would call, this is obviously replacement anti-Semitism, right? This is the Charlottesville March. And I also want to emphasize, I always start out a talk about anti-Semitism on the left with a reminder about anti-Semitism on the right. Because if you're just seeing one, or you're saying the problems on one or of the side, you're missing the picture, right? It's amazing what fascists and communists agreed upon, right? Amazing what they agreed upon. So this is the replacement anti-Semitism, and the rabbinic perspective on Rome is that Rome is the city that replaces, right? It takes Jerusalem over for itself. And that gets repeated in various forms in history, where people will be claiming, and there's a midrash that says this, people will be claiming, Anu Yisrael, we are Israel. So there are really two kinds of Anu Yisrael. This Anu Yisrael is, we are replacing you. In 17th century London, the New Jerusalem. 17th and 18th century America, Boston, the city on the hill, right? It's a theme that, repeats itself in Christianity, right? We're taking over your place. So that's the replacement theory. Here are another picture of the angry white men. This is not the Hanukkah model. I sound like Rabbi Soloveitchik now, don't I, Dov? The Hanukkah model. This is more the Hanukkah model. Or this one, I don't know what the title for this one should be, maybe like an assimilationist one. Now here, people may recognize this image from the Dyke March in 2017, where people in the LGBTQT community were out celebrating their identities. And it was really a celebration of diversity, except the committee that ran this gathering forbade the group that we see in front of us, forbade them from actually participating. It says so much about anti-Semitism. It's not that they just said, oh, they're the Jews and we're going to exclude them. the reason they can't tolerate the Jews in the intersectional rainbow is because we are the basis of everything they oppose, because we believe in things that threaten their universalism. Jews, again, this is what we bother Christians. We're still here, right? Bothers people. That's anti-Semitism. The Jews are irritating, really, really irritating for various reasons. Ethics, God, right? Morality, right? Virtue. Also, that's one thing. And the other is the people who have taken that over from the Jews, the Christians, their universalism demands that we don't exist anymore, right? And the fact that we continue to exist and be on their radar screen, it's very painful. It's the cause of anxiety. Anyway, there is an interesting parallel between the development of early Christianity and progressives today. That early Christianity makes itself, makes Christianity in relationship to the Jewish particular, and everything that has to do with the particular, the letter, the matter, the physical, all of those things are seen as Jewish. And their opposite, Paul's kind of appropriation of Plato for Christianity, the opposite is spirit, eternal life. And that's a universal message. So here we have, and I don't know the extent to which people here know how much the progressive movement, and it used to be that whenever you said progressive movement in universities, it included Jews, but it doesn't anymore. It doesn't unless you kind of disavow any connection you have to Israel. I would be suspicious of what I'm saying if I heard it from somebody else, and I'm always suspicious of anecdotal stories. But over the past year, I was at the Institute for Advanced Study in Jerusalem, and every week we had people coming through from major universities in North America and Europe. And you could really see the extent to which their progressive thought has ossified into an orthodoxy. Meaning, and it's tragic for education because they don't really think anymore. And the tragedy is all these people who've gone into English literature who I met are brilliant, brilliant people, but they're terrified of their own shadows because they can't say things. There's just so much they can't risk saying. So, and again, and anti-Semitism and the anti-Israel it's the foundational base of this intersectional variety, because the intersectional variety, well, we're universalists. We don't believe in the nation state. We don't believe in any of the things that bring us apart, right? And then they look at the state of Israel. And the state of Israel represents two things: the old time religion, right? Fundamentalism, on the one hand, right? Another reason for progressives to reject the state of Israel. So the progressive rejection, one is through claiming that it's fundamentalist, and the other is claiming that it's fundamentalist in a political sense. It's nationalist, Zionist. Zionism's like the worst of everything, right? You take everything that Western progressive culture is turning against now, Zionism represents its apotheosis. So everybody has anxiety about the nation state, right? Because nation states have done really bad things, right? It's not a contest, but America as a nation state did really bad things. Nation states, it seems, are often built upon exclusion and blood, right? Right? And all that anxiety about the nation state is never talked about in America among progressives in relationship to Native Americans, or very few of them. But it's always talked about in relationship to Israel. It's always Israel that appears on the map of like, if I'm going to express my anxiety about nationalism, and who isn't anxious about nationalism, right? It creates inequalities, but we won't be inward about it. We'll just blame Israel. Right, so this progressive orthodoxy is very much built around anti-Semitism. Here's another example from the Philadelphia Food Festival. I think this was a little bit more recent. This was a food festival of celebrating the variety of different cuisines from around the world, and the Moshava food truck from Philadelphia was asked to kindly park outside the main event. They were not allowed admittance. The Chicago Dyke Mark was already, I think, by this time a reference point, so they changed their mind pretty fast. But there still was that initial movement to say, no, we're going to celebrate any kind of difference, but not yours. Right? People tend to think, oh, it's just incidental because there's a state of Israel and there's so much tension around Israel. It's the constant in world history. It's the constant. Right. So going back to our question is to think about Hanukkah, or exactly what happened, what the rabbis see as happening during Hanukkah, that is helpful for us to understand the contemporary anti-Semitism that we see flourishing on the left, right? There's that whole other phenomenon that we see flourishing on the right, but this is very much the one that's flourishing on the left. And when I say left, I mean people, because of the way the genius of the Republican Party up until like 5 minutes ago, they turned every liberal into a bad person. So that effect on the left has been, people on the right say every liberal is a bad person, and then people adopt the term liberal to refer to an agenda that is an illiberal one, because when you're dogmatic about anything, it's illiberal. And the contemporary progressives are like Puritans, that you really have to think of theological models. They believe so strongly in the virtue of their cause because they feel a deeply ethical desire. But there's also that kind of sickness of having to have everybody be part of it and not to allow difference. We tend to think of these kinds of psychological or sociological organizations as being native to the right, and they are, but they're also on the left. Just because you've read, unfortunately, just because you've read a few books, it's also people not learning how to read anymore. But getting a PhD is not a guarantee of the kind of self-conscious sophistication that we, I think, take for granted, which is odd. In any event, so let's look at let's go to the traditional shear format here. Oh, this is cool, actually, what I found. So here is Voltaire and Paul, and those are two different versions. You really get Rome and Greece here, right? You get the replacement theory, although Voltaire is a strange person to put there because he's definitely an Enlightenment figure. But Voltaire puts it, pretty simply: Jews need to be destroyed because they're an obstacle to Christian Enlightenment, because the Jews represent, this pullback in history, right? And Paul, that's the other side. This is really what we're talking about. There is neither Jew nor Greek. So that there is the universalism there, but the Greek gets the better end of the bargain because the Greek is universal and the Jew is particular. It's the Jew that is being assimilated. Yeah. So, I don't know. I think sometimes I tend to talk about my generation or my experience as if it's definitive of other people's experiences. And I'm just thinking, like, when I learned this stuff in college or high school, I didn't take it seriously. It just seemed like, oh, this is over. This doesn't exist anymore. And now when I read it very differently. Ilana, what's your experience? I mean, have you always had this? Listen, I'm a liberal. This is one of the things that's so painful to me, right? And I'm trashing the left. I don't want to be doing that. But the progressive left has taken over what we believe in without the toleration part. Sorry, Ilana, I asked you a question. Yeah.
Well, first of all, I didn't grow up with any anti-Semitism, but my parents remembered it, and not being accepted into universities and that type of thing. But I lived in New York and surrounded by Jews. And
right, no, so that was my parents' generation, our generation, whatever, they rode the wave of American prosperity. I mean, the Jews did it best. The Jews invented it. I'm sure there's a sociologist out there who will say that the Jews really invented America in the second part of the 20th century because they invented this sense of exceptionalism, which fits into this American meritocracy. You want the Protestant work ethic? We'll show you, right? We can do that, right? Right.
But can I hold up a leftist flag? Is that allowed here?
Yeah, hold up. You have to hold up any flag you want. I'm sure I'll hold it up with you.
No, I'm just saying it's kind of tricky because I do agree with you that there's absolutely anti-Semitism on the left, and the what do you call it, the boycott and sanction movement. They'll talk about selling Palestinian body organs.
Okay.
That's pure anti-Semitism. It's a blood libel that's from, whenever. On the other hand, Israel's done some pretty horrific things there.
Okay, right.
There has to be
we can beat our breasts as much as we want. You know what? I would just say World Cup at Qatar. For me, that was like such a revelation moment because the hatred was casual. It wasn't even like it's organized. You just see like they hate us. They hate us. You're right. I didn't vote for the current government. I work in my classroom to create a community of toleration and respect, right? We do bad things. Nation states do bad things. But the focus, the obsessive focus on Israel is
absolutely
right. Anyway, so let's go back to the question.
But I just find it frustrating that there's no way to really criticize Israel without falling into either being anti-Semitic or
we can try to be leaders and do that, right? Okay, but let's go back to the question that I asked before. You'll find this interesting, I think. I'm sure, Dov, you know this. Everybody learns this in yeshiva, right? The Bach that the Mishnah Berurah brings, right? So the Mishnah Berurah, which is a 20th century kind of halachic compendium, which really became authoritative for most of the Jewish people after the Shoah. He's here talking about, or he's trying to tell the difference between Hanukah and Purim, or rather, the Mishnah Berurah is saying that if you want to understand the Hanukkah story, you have to understand it in relationship to the Purim story and the differences between the two of them. Okay? So we'll read the English part here, and then I'll paraphrase some of the Hebrew. So he says, the Assyrian Greek Hellenist Antiochus did not decree to kill the Jews and destroy them, in contrast to the Purim story where Haman wanted to exterminate all the Jews, wipe them out, but rather to cause them such suffering that they would abandon their faith. For if Israel had submitted to the Greeks and abandoned their faith, they would have been satisfied. So the context for this discussion is, it's not a mitzvah to eat on Hanukkah. Tell that to Roladin, tell that to the donut makers, right? But 13th century rabbi, the Maharam of Rottenburg, said it's not a mitzvah to eat on Hanukkah, but if you're having a meal, you should add some divrei Torah, and it becomes a Sudat Hanukkah, right? But he goes out of his way to say it's not a mitzvah. And that's important to us because on Purim, the one of the primary mitzvot, the one that takes the most of our time, is the meal. It revolves around the food, right? So Haman, let's just make sure we have the contrast here. Haman, his goal, and this is his goal is to destroy the Jewish people. We will replace you, or not. We don't even want to replace you. We just want to kill you. And Antiochus, how could we put it in terms that would help us make more sense of this? What did Antiochus want?
He wanted assimilation.
Right. So there are only we only have Hellenists when we talk about the four kingdoms. We don't have people who were, specialists in Babylonian culture. As Jews became specialists, they became Greek. They're becoming more and more and more Greek. So it very much is, as Alana, as you're saying, it's really it's a holiday of assimilation. But what's the mechanism here of assimilation? What?
The temple?
Forcing them to give up Judaism.
Right. So it's forcing them to give up their low. So I'm picking up right here. Shalom gazer aleim laharogol ashmid rak soros v'shmadot k'day lemahir datam, to change their minds, right? To
convert.
To convert them. Thank you, C. Right. Kamosha anu omrim lahashkicham toratecha, to make them forget their Torah. And take them away from your will, from your jurisdiction. Yeah, so there's so much here, really. One of the things that he goes on to say is that Purim as a celebration reflects the nature of the miracle, the transgression, eating at the feast of Achashverosh, the solution, fasting, right, with the body, the celebration, the su'udah, right, with the body. And, when we talk about Purim again, we can think more about what is taught there or what is learned there. But Hanukkah is really the opposite. Hanukkah is a holiday of heightened perception, of sharpness, of sight. And similarly, and that's why the Maharam Rottenburg says it's not a mitzvah, because he says Hanukkah is not concerned with the physical in the same way that Purim is. Hanukkah is, and what do we do on Hanukkah? What are the mitzvot that we do on Hanukkah? So we light candles. What else? Hoda'ah, right? Praise.
Do Hallel.
Pardon?
Hallel. On Shachri.
Hallel, right. Okay, yeah. So so that Hallel is the vehicle through which praise is expressed, right? So that praise, we still have to think of it. I mean, I hear you, but we still have to think of that praise as emanating internally. So when we talk about Hanukkah as being a holiday of light, it's not that, as somehow I envisioned in Hebrew school, or even later, that like everything lights up, but the light of Hanukkah is an internal light. It's a way of seeing the world. It's especially relevant to seeing, the two holidays, Purim and Hanukkah, they're both rabbinic holidays, and both of them end in failure, really. The Jews don't get killed in Purim, but they don't maintain sovereignty or anything, right? People don't, and we don't say Hallel on Purim. That's one of the reasons the rabbis say we don't say Hallel on Purim. And then Hanukkah, they succeeded, as Dov and I were talking about briefly, and then they lost. So it's like this is essential to the understanding of the holidays, is that Purim is about history. Hanukkah, the rabbis say, you can't write about Hanukkah. Ein lahachtov. It's actually Gemara, right? Purim is about writing. Esther comes, according to the Midrash, comes to the sages and says, or to the, put my story in the Persian library. And they said, we already have it. It's all about writing, right? And Hanukkah is not about writing and not about time as much, but more about sight and perception. If you wanted to, you're Antiochus, right? And you're going to be gozer gezerot against the Jewish people to try to disconnect them from their heritage and try to think like rabbis here, right? What would be the things that you would do to try to disconnect them from their tradition? What would you prevent? I mean, Dov, you probably just know this. I mean, right, this kind of things you learn in day school, right?
Mila,
Hmm.
Tyra, there's one more. Shabbos, I think.
Wait. So what are the ones you learned? Mila?
So
Go ahead.
teaching teaching Tyra. So like, and then it comes back by with the Kiva.
Okay. So it's and Rosh Chodesh is Rosh Chodesh, and I think
I thought it was Shabbos.
Shabbos, I think, is in there also. Whatever. So let's I mean, first of all, and the account that the rabbis give of the Greek gezerot against them, it differs. Sometimes there are different things that are mentioned. But Mila, so let's go with Mila. What about Mila is something that would bug you if you're a universalist?
This is a physical distinction.
Yeah, I mean, in the most basic sense, it's the Jew saying, I'm different. I'm different. And
it also means you're going to get married to only within your group.
Okay. And it's a physical, this, Ilana, you know what? I got to tell you, this is a disappointing holiday for us in a way. This is the holiday of particularity, right? Yeah, it is where we claim our identity. That can include all of the protests that you brought in before. But the Jewish claim, where were we, guys, the people, before? Give me a word association so I can get back on track.
Mila, Torah, and
Mila, right. So Mila, right. So that's a physical manifestation of the body being affected and imprinted with a Jewish identity. What about Rosh Chodesh? It's another good one, right?
Oh, that's the temporality, the schedule there.
Right. This is what we love talking about. See, right? So tell me about temporality.
Everything is everything is predicated on the Rosh Chodesh.
Everything is predicated on Rosh Chodesh. So the first thing is we see that Jews mark time in a specific kind of way. And they mark time in a specific way. And that specific way also involves a certain kind of creativity, right? The rabbi, it's in Shabbos happens all the time. That's God's. It's the solar calendar. That's all God's. The Jewish months, the months that we live in, those are determined by Beit Din, right? Through a process, a declaration. Right? We say now it's Rosh Chodesh. So we know also, even if they're wrong, as it were, it's still Rosh Chodesh, because human wisdom and creativity are so important and part of that Jewish particularity. And of course, Torah as well. The Medrash says, if somebody tells you that there is knowledge among the nations, you must believe him, her. If someone tells you there is Torah among the nations, do not believe them. what's the distinction? Why would they care? Why would they care? I'm gonna throw in another variable. Just, you may have to remind me where we were. I'm gonna throw in another variable, and that is when Hanukkah is over, there is a fast day. The fast day is the 10th of Tevet, right? If you're, first of all, it's the easiest fast because it's in the middle of the winter, right? So it's very short. It's a day fast, and it is tied up with the liturgy. The liturgy is tied up with the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash. Something happened at that time. But the rabbis also point out that this was the day the Torah was translated into Greek. And there was a day of mourning because the Torah was translated into Greek. The rabbis acknowledge that the Greeks have more wisdom than any of the nations of the world. But, and this is the famous story, that another rabbinic story about how Ptolemy, the Greek king, told the 70 elders of the Sanhedrin to come together and write a Torah translation. They were put in separate rooms, and they produced a translation into Greek, which was similar and the rabbi somehow avoided certain kinds of heretical associations that might have come up. In any event, so Ptolemy says, I want this for my library, right? And I think in that the way I'm describing Ptolemy's desire, I think helps understand what bugs the Greeks about the Jews. And when I say the Greeks about the Jews, I mean everybody today, is that Ptolemy says, I want this book for my library. What's the instinct there? It's not just the translation itself. We know in the beginning of Deuteronomy, God says to Moses, translate the Torah into 70 languages, right? But it's not just the translation, it's the use to which the translation is put. That Ptolemy wants to take it. Remember, the story is he empties out the Beit HaMikdash. There's only a idol in the center of the Beit HaMikdash. There's nothing there. He's emptied out the shell. There's only a shell outside. There is no holiness at all remaining. And in that place, this is, early Israeli kind of Zionist schools were called gymnasia, because they were German. That was the model, right? There's a gymnasia in Rehavia, but gymnasium for the Greeks meant this place of really the worship of the body. And what could also imagine for the Greeks, they're taking Torah and putting it into the Greek library. Now, I think the issue there is that the place in which you read a book determines in a way how you read it. Is that true? Like, what's the difference between reading? I mean, it's probably not true for. What is there a difference between reading a sacred book in a place you associate with that sacred text, or reading it in the library, right? In a way, it's even just the way the texts appear in the library. And I'm the greatest, I'm in the great lover of libraries club, right? Don't get me wrong here, but in the library, sacred books are placed together on the same shelf, right? That is the important universalist emphasis of our culture today, right? That accommodation of particularity. And remember, the first accommodation of particularity is the Jewish one. And if the Jews go down, everybody else goes down also. So, yeah. Where were we? Yeah. Go ahead,
So
Tom,
just to relate it to this left universalism, one thing I've noted that's like a catchphrase is they suggest that like the Judaism's acceptable, but it's the Zionism that's the problem.
Right. So I mean, and Zionism is of course the material way in which Judaism, if you were even to call Judaism as a religion, it's really more a way of life, right? Judaism expresses itself through the connection to the land, or to Israel, to whatever that represents. Meaning, this is how we express our identity, ideally, right? And yes, I mean, the early reform movement, one of the things they did was they wanted to be enlightened Jews, so they didn't like the particularity of Orthodox Sidurim, so they took out all references to the state of Israel, right? Because they were embracing this kind of universalism. This is before the state. The history of the Reform Sidur is interesting, right? Because it's a push away from the particularity. Right.
And so then there's this other theme of like the form versus the power. I mean, in terms of what Antiochus and like the form's acceptable as long as it's been hollowed out to no longer have the power.
Good. So good. Let's go on with that. Here's a piece from the Maharal of Prague, and he writes about Hanukah in a book called Ner Mitzvah. Maharal's it's a good text to read because there are very good editions of it, for one. And he writes in a very simple way. I mean, I'm not saying the Maharal is simple, but he does repeat himself over and over and over again. And you really can get a very, I mean, there's certain things about the Maharal I really, really relate to. It's nice, just nice to get different perspectives. But this is cool. The wisdom of the Greeks, he says, first of all, the wisdom of the Greeks spread from all sides. That's his way. He uses a very literal metaphor, but it's his way of talking about Greek knowledge spread, it became universal. The length and breadth of the world without limits. The Maharal saying this in the 16th century. And for this reason, the Greeks did not oppose Israel except for their adherence to the Torah. And this was the whole essence of Greece, to nullify Israel's connection to the Torah, meaning to take away its special status. We'll go back to what you said in a minute, Tom. Even though the Greeks assaulted the temple, they did not destroy it. It's the way the Maharal represents it. You can just see, even in the attack upon the Jews, the way it happened, you can see in it what the intention of the Greeks. Even though the Greeks assaulted the temple, they did not destroy it. Tom, this is what you were saying about form. Similarly, they did not pour out or destroy the oil, right? Again, about form. They kept the form, but rather made it impure, because they wanted to blur the distinction between Israel and the nations. The desecration of the sanctuary and making the oil impure took away the sacred status of the oil, right? So what's happening here, and the Maharal, when he writes this, is simultaneously writing about the oil, but also in his metaphysics, he's writing about the way in which one can look like a Jew and be a Jew. I'm not getting into existential questions. Person's a Jewish person, but whatever was essential to their Jewish identity has been taken away. And young people in America are becoming more and more victimized by a universalism that does not allow them to have a voice anymore. I speak about this personally. I told you about the Institute. I also have nieces and nephews who went to, like everybody that I know from my high school and they all have experiences where one of my good friends, his son, was canceled and had to transfer out of his school because of anti-Semitism. And on the other side, my niece and nephew, they have moved over, this is the problem, is they gravitate towards BDS because the other option is not an option for them. Again, Alana, I think the reason that we need to talk about the left more is because they have always been the thing that has preserved against this. And now it's not doing its job anymore. Right? There's no self-consciousness coming from the academy or critical thinking coming from the academy. And Jewish kids are under stress, and they're not going to, as we said, they're not going to go listen to some Hasbara people, because those people, I agree with you, they are not good for the Jewish people, because they turn Zionism into a cartoon. And, you know, as Alana was saying earlier, there are complexities to our story, but we do have a story and we do have the right to tell it, just like everybody else does. Just like everybody else does. And that's what Hanukkah is. When you see these menorahs out in cities in Europe, there's, you know, and I'm usually like very skeptical about these things, but it's like a big F you, we are still here. We're still here, right? And that's, I think just generationally, Alana, we have similar backgrounds, right? Nobody ever thought, like, took the Holocaust. I mean, the Holocaust was this really, 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 really bad thing, which was never going to happen again. That's what, when I was growing up. And my aunts and uncles, who were of the older generation, who would talk about Schwarzes and Goyim, the reason they did that is because, well, they were terrified that they were immigrants in this terrifying new culture, which they were in many ways thriving in, but it was still a very strange one. And for them, they just remembered the Nazis, right? They felt it. They're like, we're going to, and, you know, for us, my generation was, you know, I tell this to my students now, I was just at the end of the time when, you know, the world is just open to you, right? I came from an upper middle class background. Everybody in my cohort in school is like becoming chief executives of this, producers of that, doctors, lawyers. We all rode the wave, right? I consider myself part of that group. And we never thought twice about the Holocaust as something that could, I mean, it was always the horrible thing that once happened. But now, I think, I'm not saying we're in a time of that, but we have to start again to become sensitive to the reality of anti-Semitism around us. And I think a lot of us have not been doing that and taking responsibility for that. And part of that, I think, and part of that is the asserting of, and here's the Musar part. And this is what we have to teach our kids. There are many ways of being Jewish, right? There are many ways of expressing that voice that takes that outer form, that takes the oil and makes it sacred, right? That's what the Greeks did, is they blurred the distinction between sacred and secular. They don't want any distinction. The Jews were the problem. We're always saying we're exceptional. We are, right? I mean, we are. It's, you know, it's a huge responsibility because, you know, Jews have done, right? I don't have to tell you, we know what the Jewish contribution to world history is immeasurable. We're exceptional. We're still here. But, and this is, I think, I feel strongly about, that our exceptionalism as a people must be reflected in us as individuals. We must be exceptional as well. And to be exceptional means, and it's much harder, I know now, than it was in the past, to be exceptional means to find your voice and to find that Jewish voice. And I, you know, if I'm not, you know, and we shouldn't look to anybody else for models. I mean, people who inspire us. Part of the problem we have is that we have really bad models of religious observance, or the ones that we see are really bad. And we start to idealize the ones that are really bad and then distance ourselves from that and say, I want no part of that. And in the process, we lose the ability to have a kind of voice or kind of connection, right? Where I know we're all cynical of those terms. I think voice is a good one. And I mean, we all have a conception of the eternal in our lives. I know we do, because I've spoken to you about works that we've read together. I hear about things that you're doing in your lives. Jewish people, we believe in something that transcends the literal, really. And that's what we sang earlier, the light of Hanukkah. That the holiday was not actually declared. They had the war. They were like, oh, good, we won that war, right? Then the next year, there's the Hanukkah miracle. And then they look back and they say, oh, that war, that was a miracle, right? Right? Again, and that's what Hanukkah is, this holiday for Galut. Because they lost in the end. We're entering a time where it's really, really, really dark. And and the oil is like going with the Maharal a little bit. The oil, the sacred aspect. So that sacred aspect we have to reclaim the sacred, people. The human is the sacred, and I'm not being a heretic here. This is the Jewish sacred is human. That is, but it's our responsibility as humans to be responsive to the sacred. And I think we all are in various ways, because we don't live lives of the constant pursuit after money. I'm working, my son has an office in WeWork, and I work in there in the mornings. It's a quiet place. And they're so boring because they're all they want to do is make money. And you see these people, they're having very animated conversations, but they're all about making money. And, we're here talking about this stuff, which means we have that sense. So we have to speak, I'm just getting the Maccabean part of the holiday. It's like Judah Maccabee. It's like, be really courageous and fight for a lost cause, because you're going to lose in the end, right? But that's what we're doing now. We keep on fighting for what seems like a lost cause, because the anti-Semitism in the world is so crazy now. But I think people like us have to feel the obligation of thinking about ways in which it's not even it's not strengthening Jewish identity, it's strengthening personal identity, right?
Personal identity as a Jew.
Exactly. Oh,
maybe enough.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just bothered. I've had to coin this phrase that like weakness is not a virtue, because something emerging out of the left that extols this, like what's been called victimhood, this culture of victimhood. And it seems to be attacking, actually, Ayn Rand comes to mind, not one of my favorites, but she seems, but she seems to recount, I saw something recently of her, and she lived through that period of the Soviet Bolshevik Revolution, and where they essentially took down all the strong men, so to speak. And she started talking about the pinnacle of that. This victimhood is when they get to the point of attacking the good because it's good. So they seem to have a real disliking for being strong. It's almost a celebration of weakness, like it's a race to
right. No, I hear that, right? And yeah, I mean, so that's why we have to celebrate our sense of responsibility, I think. Here's George Steiner, and he was a very very well respected, and in some sense very influential scholar. He has very interesting things to say about the Holocaust in a book called In Bluebeard's Castle. Here he decided to write about the state of Israel and Zionism. And he makes a distinction between the citizen of Israel and a scholar. Steiner, a Jew himself, kind of provided a handbook for contemporary anti-Semitism, for the Greek version. A true thinker, a scholar must know that no nation, no body politic, no creed, no moral ideal and necessity, be that of human survival, is worth of a falsehood, right? This is such bullshit, pardon me. A willed deception or the manipulation of a text. The knowledge and observance are his homelands. The Steiner's, the trope is nice, is the Jew's place, the Jew's homeland is his text, right? The scholar can never deal with any kind of lack of virtue, any kind of imperfection. It's a hostility towards activity. It's a hostility towards action, right? Jews cannot act. Jews can only think. The knowledge and observance are his homeland, the prophetic and the speculative addiction to insight. You see this guy's, it's like he got away with this kind of writing. Don't try it at home. The prophetic and the speculative addiction to insight are the nationhood of Judaism, right? He's a good writer. So the prophetic he's just throwing in, or because he's really learning the prophetic as a function of the speculative, meaning you can take certain prophets, Isaiah, Solomon, and you can assimilate them to enlightenment, which is what a lot of people did, right? The prophetic and the speculative addiction to insight are the nationhood of Judaism. Right? Again, it's the reform movement revisited. Any manifestation of particularity, we have to get away from. And there's also this, I don't know, there also seems to be this idea that if we only behaved a little bit better, they wouldn't do this to us. Like if we weren't such bad Zionists, they wouldn't do this to us. No other nation in the world would think this, right? Serbians don't come home at night and think, oh, we're being attacked. They don't have the same kind of self-consciousness. They're, another hated people in the world, but they don't internalize the hate. We do, right? We're always sorry. It's not even that we're always sorry, and we can be sorry, but we're always taking responsibility for other people's things. And sometimes it leads us to our own inaction. The responsibility that we have to feel to ourselves. Which again, and that's like Hanukah, I'm getting it. It's an activity, right? You express a certain kind of enthusiasm, praise on Hanukah that reflects a knowledge that the world and all of its darkness is light. Hanukkah is the holiday of perception. Rembrandt is the obvious patron saint of Hanukkah. I was hoping he had something on the Judah Maccabea, but Rembrandt is the painter where the darkness is the light, right? And Hanukkah is like, in order to celebrate Hanukkah properly, you have to learn how to look at a Rembrandt, because Rembrandt tells you, see beyond, right? See the light in the darkness. And part of what we can do is particularize, be Jewish in a way that you feel could be in some ways a model for other people. Leadership starts early. Especially religious people are told there are only a few leaders and you can't be one of them, Right? In Israel, especially in the Haredi world in general. We'll promise you're very, very brilliant and you should stay in learning your entire life. And one day you'll be a great Rosh Yeshiva. Oh, there only are a few Rosh Yeshivas and you're not one of them. That's how it works, right? Anyway.
They're all related.
Pardon, Doug?
And they're all related. So if you weren't born in the right family.
They're already, and they also hate each other, right? And they're right. All right, people. So thank you for sharing this Hanukkah night. I'm going to go light candles. Okay, it's good to see everybody.
Thank you.
Yalla bye.
Yeah, yalla.
Thank you.
Call to be well.